most of you probably know exactly who Chip is, but if you don't, you've probably slept in one of his beds. And
Well, that's a little too much information.
I have a forum mate who makes bedding for the hotel industry, and she always says, "If you don't know me, you've probably slept with me." So, anyway, Chip, Chip had a long and illustrious career as a hotelier. He founded the second largest boutique hotel chain, which was ultimately sold to Hyatt, I believe. And even though Chip speaks in his book about his state of mind at that time and the difficulties he was facing, it is indeed a part of your entrepreneurial journey. And we're speaking to maybe 400 entrepreneurs. So Chip's graduate of Stanford University, and from Joie de Vivre Hotels that he founded, he went on to work as one of the elders of Airbnb, which, needless to say, has gone on to become the most valuable hospitality company. And then was it 2018 that you founded MEA?
Yep. Yep.
And yeah, Chip and some co-founders founded MEA, which is dedicated to helping people our age find meaning and purpose, and really change the paradigm around how we view middle age, not as what we lose, but more as to what we gain. So for starters, I think it's appropriate that we talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, given your history and given that outside of a short stint in real estate, you have really paved your own path throughout your professional career. So can you tell us just a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey and how it led you to found MEA?
Yeah, so I went to Stanford undergrad, went to Stanford Business School, and a couple years out of business school, I was doing commercial real estate in San Francisco. I'd spent a summer during business school at Morgan Stanley in their real estate division in New York, and I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't want to be an institutional kind of guy, so I went to work for a maverick real estate developer in San Francisco. And after a couple of years there, I said, like, oh, the form of commercial real estate I really want to focus on is hotels, and boutique hotels were just getting off the ground. This is the mid 1980s. And so I called the company Joie de Vivre. I said, our mission statement is also the name of the company. We create joy of life. And for the next 24 years, I was the CEO of that company that grew from 1 to 52 hotels, all of them in California, most of them in the Bay Area. And I loved it till I hated it. I so relate to entrepreneurs who create their own Frankenstein. You create the business and then the business sort of takes over. And grew from 1 employee to 3,500 employees, and it was hard. We went through two once in a lifetime downturns in the same decade, with the dot-com bust, 9/11, and SARS in the early part of this millennium, and then the Great Recession. And it was during the Great Recession that I had an NDE, a near-death experience, and I just said, like, okay, I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to die, is this how I want to spend the last years of my living? And I said no. I was 47 years old. That sounds familiar. I think the average age of people in EO Alchemy is 47 years old. So I was 47, and I was really, really struggling with what might have been called a midlife crisis. I now call it the midlife chrysalis, because it's dark and gooey, but it's also the cocoon in between the caterpillar and the butterfly. And there's some transformation that can happen during this era of one's life, because our painful life lessons are often the raw material for our future wisdom. And I got to the other side of it and sold the business, had a couple of years of what I call a midlife atrium, in which I was able to have time and space to sort of look and be curious to, like, what are things that I really want to do in my life, and fun stuff. And I really had 2 great years between 50 and 52. And then at 52, I was called by Brian Chesky, the co-founder and the CEO of this tiny little tech startup called Airbnb. And he said, Chip, how would you like to democratize hospitality with us? And that was the start of a 7.5-year journey, 4 years full-time, and then 3.5 years part-time, as their modern elder. That's what they called me. I didn't like that at first. like I was twice the age of the average person. They're like, but why do you have to like rub it in by like making me sound like I'm elderly? And they said, you're not elderly. You're an elder. You're older than the people around us. But a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. And when I heard that, I was like, sign me up. The alchemy, speaking of alchemy, the alchemy of curiosity and wisdom. That feels very potent. And so yeah, that led me to ultimately writing a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And while I was writing that book down in Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas on the beach, I had a Baja aha, I had an epiphany one day. And I started wondering why there were no midlife wisdom schools or places where people could sort of reimagine, repurpose themselves in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. After they've sold their business, after they've gotten divorced, after they're an empty nester, after the parents, in the midst of their parents passing away. There's a lot going on in midlife, but we really have almost no, schools or tools or even rites of passage or rituals to help people through this time.
Fantastic. I first met you probably in around 2005, 2006, and you spoke at an EO event. And at the time, Joie de Vivre was this really hip, cool California, really Bay Area focused
Yeah.
hotel that got its start in finding blighted properties and giving them a new sense of being, a new sheen, a new cool, but also pairing them with world-class food and dining experiences. And I will say that the Hotel Vitale, which would never fit the category of formerly being blighted. I think it was a new construct right on the waterfront in San Francisco, where I used to live, served as my staycation location for many, many years. I spent a lot of nights in the Vitale, which was a
Thank you.
fantastic hotel.
Thank you. Yeah, no,
So
I love that place. It's now Barry Sternlicht bought it and it's now a one hotel. But yeah.
cool. So let's talk about your book. Here's your book. You mentioned it earlier that you originally, or you mentioned writing books original. This is your seventh book.
Yeah.
I am proud to say that I am mostly through this book, and I wish you had, as I said earlier, written it a lot earlier, and I wish I had read it earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? I know that, again, what inspired this book is pretty well covered in the opening chapters of the book. But can you tell us a little bit about your writing process, how you find inspiration in general, and what motivates you to write a book? A lot of us that you're going to speak to have enormous if you will, like almost like a reserves of information and experiences that we've taken through these entrepreneurial journeys. But many of us aren't sitting down and taking the time to really express it. So talk to us about that process.
Yeah, no, I'll do it in the context of being an entrepreneur. So when I was like 12 or 13, I said to my parents, I want to be a writer when I grow up. And my dad did everything he could to dissuade me from that. And so I put that idea away. And then as a successful entrepreneur at around age 36, 37, and I'd had my company now for at that point, I don't know, maybe a decade or so, Joie de Vivre, I was giving a speech and there was a literary agent in the audience. And she came up to me after the speech. She said, have you ever wanted to write, Chip? And I laughed at her and I said, like my dad told me writers are either poor or psychotic and most are both. And I was like, I don't even know what it kind of meant back then, but like didn't sound good. And so, yeah, I'd love to write. And she says, you have a book inside of you. You have a book and you're a rebel and a business leader. And Richard Branson, somebody I know, Chip, and he might write the foreword to the book. And so I wrote a book called The Rebel Rules, Daring to Be Yourself in Business. And that was the first of my 7 books. And what I've come to realize over the course of writing all of these books is that my writing process helps me make sense of things. Sometimes people make sense of things by going to therapy, or they go, for a walk in nature with their dog, and all of a sudden everything becomes clear. For me, writing helps make things clearer for me. And so a lot of my books have been at the intersection of psychology and business and leadership. And so I like the fact that my leadership and business books are sort of a little unusual. They're not just purely tactical or purely strategic. They're very personal. And one of my books, Peak: How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, is really about a psychology theory, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, applied to organizations. And that book continues to do very, very well. And so long story short is I love writing. And so I have a daily blog. You can find it on either the MEA website, meawisdom.com, or on chipconley.com. And so I write a lot these days and I love it. And yeah, I feel at times like I'm pregnant with a new book inside of me. And when I am, I have to really sit down and get serious about it. And I tend to write best and most in the morning, really early morning, like 4:30 in the morning.
That concept of writing to create clarity resonates with me. Unfortunately, for the people around me, it's oftentimes I have to orate to find clarity.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing that it's much more scrambled in my brain, but by the time it makes its way out through my voice, it has greater meaning, more synthesis.
Mhm.
Well, anyway, fantastic. Well, as a lifelong entrepreneur and as somebody who experienced these downturns in the hospitality industry, clearly you are no stranger to the concept of brace. As the co-founder of MEA and the author of this amazing book, you are clearly no stranger to embrace. So can you tell us a little bit about what comes to mind when you think of this sort of juxtaposition of brace and embrace?
Yeah, I think being an entrepreneur is a roller coaster. That's really what I have experienced is there's moments when external factors or sometimes even internal factors within your company uh, force you to brace, force you to just sort of like say, fight or flight, fight, freeze, or flight. And I, you have to act or you have to respond, or you have to actually sort of say like, okay, let me pause and see what I'm seeing here. But you actually do have to be aware and awake enough to know something needs to change. And that's hard. It's really hard when you have a company or as a leader, you see you have to change. Um, and then during the good times you can embrace, um but you also need to like invest in the culture. One of the things that's just unfortunate is I see companies that invest in the culture in the good times and then they just gut the culture in the bad times. And it's like in the bad times, that's when the culture is the most valuable, because quite frankly, in the bad times your team needs to come together and you may have to make some cutbacks in costs and even staffing. And that's when the culture is most valuable. And my book Peak really talks about that quite a bit. And I just highly recommend that people recognize that these are the two sides, brace and embrace. And you're never going to be in one all the time or the other. You're just going to go from one to the other, but it is in the good times that you need to be investing and preparing for the bad times. And the most important investment you can make is in culture. And, as Peter Drucker said long ago, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And yeah.
So, I know we can look at this in terms of our businesses, but also it's really hard to distinguish your personal life from your professional life when you're an entrepreneur, a founder. How do you wake up every morning? I mean, this is just for me personally. I find myself a little bit terrified right now, just kind of in the world we're living in. And the older I get, the more my focus is inward. I'm finding as I'm getting older that I'm becoming a lot more spiritual. I wasn't raised with religion in my life. I'm a liberal Bay Area guy, probably like you. And I'm finding that I'm pursuing more and more avenues to find faith, especially sort of as a corollary to control, which we really have very little of anymore. So can you talk a little bit more about this holistically outside of the context of business?
Yeah, you're talking my language in the sense that this week here at our MEA campus in Santa Fe, we have a campus in Baja and also a campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have a guy named Richard Rohr here with us. And Richard Rohr's written 42 books. He's maybe the most famous Catholic priest and Christian mystic in the world. And his book called Falling Upward, which is really about a spirituality for the two halves of life. He says that the first half of your life, the primary operating system is your ego, and it's around midlife. The primary operating system shifts to your soul, but nobody told you it was coming and nobody gave you operating instructions for this new operating system. And that, how does that show up? It shows up in a curiosity and maybe a little bit of a gut check on like what is meaningful to you and purposeful to you in life. It may be you see that some of the things that used to matter to you don't matter quite as much. Some of them may be very egocentric things. It could be an interesting, a new interest in the mysteries of life, or just things that create awe for you. You know, awe is the experience of feeling small in something bigger than yourself, which is something that, you know, entrepreneurs often don't necessarily seek out, because quite frankly, we're the opposite of that. We're the center of the universe,
Yeah.
and everything's sort of revolving around us. So to actually move out of that center of the universe place into a place where you're sort of in awe of the mysteries of life, of nature, of collective effervescence, of moral beauty, of music, and of a sort of a lingering feeling of like something spiritual, some connection to something bigger than yourself. Um, I've seen it happen over and over again, often in their late 40s or early 50s. Entrepreneurs sort of wake up to this point and say, like, you know what? I still want to be an entrepreneur, but I have a different flavor of how I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm less focused maybe on the return on investment ROI and more focused on the ripples of impact ROI. And yeah, I mean, this is what I teach at MEA. It's what I will be talking about, you know, in Denver with you, and at the EO Alchemy conference. And I'm just excited because back, you know, 20 years ago when I started saying karmic capitalism is a thing, and what I was saying is what goes around comes around. It might take a while, but you know, if you do good things in the world as an entrepreneur, generally speaking, it's not like always immediate. Things come back to you. And that's a point of view that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, people looked at me and laughed. And today people look at me and they say, like, yeah, that's what we call conscious capitalism today, Chip. John Mackey's philosophy, you know, and John is a friend, and John is a huge advocate of my book Peak and the Peak philosophy and leadership model. And yeah, maybe conscious capitalism is a better language than karmic capitalism. But I appreciate the fact that I was sort of one of the pioneers of this idea.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It can be called many things. I'm calling it meaning. You know, I find that if I were to divide up my brain in terms of energy, the vast majority of it these days is going towards having purpose and meaning. Even when I come to my office in the morning, it's a little bit like, okay, well, how am I going to structure my day? Because the old stuff doesn't work anymore. It's just not satisfying, right? Especially for those of us who, and I say it's probably the majority of the people in EO who have already hit a plateau of meeting their, you know, their needs.
Yeah.
Then it becomes, for me anyway, about very much about meaning. So we mentioned earlier that the average age of the people is coming is 47. I'm 54. Without disclosing what your book is all about, of course, there are 12 steps to turning a crisis into a chrysalis. Can you tell us a little bit about what we have to look forward to?
You know, what we're very familiar with is what gets worse with age. Your
Yeah, I know
short-term
that.
memory, short-term memory, your body, you know, gravity, you know, just as you get comfortable in your own skin, it starts to sag. I mean, there's a bunch of things that, you know, are not good about aging. And yet I wanted to really have this book help to illuminate the things that do get better with age. And so I focused on 12 reasons why life gets better with age, focusing on the social science of it, but also focusing on the fact that over the past 6.5 years, we've had 5,500 people from 50 countries come to and do a workshop with MEA in Baja or Santa Fe. So what are some examples of this? So an example of it's a pro-aging message. And let me also say that Becca Levy at Yale, who we've worked with on the MEA curriculum, has shown that when people shift their mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, they gain 7.5 years of additional life, which is more life than if you stopped smoking at 50 or you started exercising at 50. So this is really important stuff. So what gets better with age? Number one, one of the things that gets better with age is your emotional intelligence. Our IQ doesn't grow, but our EQ and our ability to be less emotionally reactive grows with age. Our social capital, our relational capital, our desire to have deeper friendships and relationships grows with age. Although I will say that men in their 20s and 30s and 40s often atrophy their friendship muscle, and they need to think of friendship as a practice again. What else gets better with age? Our wisdom. What Arthur Brooks in his book From Strength to Strength called crystallized intelligence. He actually profiles MEA in that book and is on our faculty. So Arthur talks about the fact that when we're young, fluid intelligence, fast and focused. When we're older, crystallized intelligence. We have four-wheel drive of the brain, and we are able to see things systemically, holistically, and connect the dots. That gets better with age. Our ability to edit our life gets better with age. The first half of our life is accumulating. Second half of our life is about editing. The ability to understand our story and our shadow and the narrative of who we are gets better with age. Our ability to actually look at what defines success in our lives and own it in a way that feels like it's our own script gets better with age. Our curiosity spiritually gets better with age. And finally, I'm not saying all 12, but I'm giving you about 7 or 8 of them. Finally, growing whole. We grow old, but we also grow whole. One of the things that gets interesting is when you meet somebody who's a little bit older than you and seems wise, you notice their presence. And it's partly because we learn as we get older to be alchemists of being an introvert and an extrovert at the same time, being curious and wise, gravitas, depth, and levity, humor, lightness. And as we get older, we, instead of sort of being polarized in ourselves, we learn how to integrate this. And you see someone who's just delightful in that whole part of, the whole way that they show up. And so, yeah, so the book goes into the social science behind that, plus many stories of my own, but also our MEA alums.
Well, thank you. I anecdotally, I can resonate with that. I grew up in a family business. My father was the patriarch, but he was also the chairman of the business. And he's now 82. And we were on one of our monthly calls, and my stepmother was behind him, and she doesn't tend to attend these calls. So I knew something was coming. And he said, you know what? You guys can't count on me anymore.
Oh.
And it was heartbreaking. But it also was such an opportunity to rediscover his value proposition in the company. And so I texted him after that. And it just so happens I had recently heard a sermon about aging and about how to perceive value in the different chapters or the different seasons of your life. And I texted him and I said, whereas you may not have the physical contributions anymore, you have all of the knowledge and the perspective and the ability to sort of tie it all together under one steady value system, and sense of purpose, that you have this 50-year career, 55-year career to be able to add perspective. So it was I guess it was a bittersweet moment, recognizing this person that I had so much, that was the rock of my life. He was such a huge role model, had thrown in the towel. But it soon moved to not throwing in the towel, but really just rediscovering how he was adding value.
Rediscover and also creating the space for others to elevate their leadership.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Chip, as we spoke earlier, this is just a teaser. I am so excited to see you in September in Denver, Colorado. And I don't want to, by purpose, I don't want to tease out too much of your speech or your book, because I want our listeners to have something to look forward to. You will see me, you personally maybe not, but you will see me, your MEA will see me in the winter. I am 100% committed. I just have not, and I know who to call. I just have not put the reservation in place, but I think my plan is to do like a midwinter Cabo as a nice break from the Denver winter.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love Baja during the winter. It's also when you have whales and sea turtles and hatching on the beach and things like that. And yeah, the last thought is EO. And YPO and all kinds of different peer-to-peer organizations do, private workshops with us, private retreats
Yeah.
with us. In Santa Fe in particular for forums. But chapters do things with us, etc. So yes, look forward to seeing everybody in Denver.
Yeah, and in fact, the fellow that sits right around the corner from me, he is bringing his EO forum down to Santa Fe to see you. And I think you might even be leading that group. So
I am. I
it's
think it's next month.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
yeah. I was just looking
So
at that. Well,
so
good.
for
That's
those of you who are listening to this, this is the ideal forum retreat. And
yes.
I encourage you to do the same. Well, Chip, thanks so much for your time. I'm excited to see you in September. Take care.
All right, Jamie. Thank
All right,
you.
see ya. Bye-bye.